very nice quote. This is the first quote that I saw many years ago. This is what got me started on extensive reading some 30 years ago. Very nice quote to remember. The best way to improve one's knowledge of a foreign language is to go and live among its speakers. That's very expensive, as we all know. But the next best way is to read extensively in it. First quote. Second quote is this guy. He's a very nice guy. I've been working with him for many, many years, and he's got something that is more meaty because he spells out some of the real benefits of people reading extensively in a language. Basically, the benefits are many, and students who read have been shown to learn a lot of language in the process. And then more recently, this is another nice guy. I quote only people that I know personally. So Richard Day. And then Alan Maley is a nice guy. Frederica is also a very nice person. I quote her a lot in my work. She has done a lot of work in reading with her husband, and I'm using her books, 2 books, for my undergraduate courses at NI Singapore. And Alan Maley says extensive reading is perhaps the most important for language development. I would like to add another quote, which I think is a better quote. There you go. The best way to learn to improve language proficiency is to engage L2 learners in both extensive reading and extensive listening or extensive viewing. And who says this? That's me. Self-promotion. It's going to appear in a new chapter that I'm working together. Hopefully it's coming out soon, published by Springer. Let me tell you why I got interested in sort of mixing, putting together extensive reading and extensive listening in one package. I've been observing very interesting things among people that I know. Here are 2 case studies. The first one is a colleague from Korea. Very good looking. Korean colleague. All of them are good looking. I mean the women. I met her in Korea. She spoke English so well. I was so impressed. I thought she was a native speaker of English. I was giving a presentation and she wanted to do an interview with me, so we had a long conversation. She interviewed me, and then she wrote up the interview for inclusion in a newsletter. After the interview, 2 weeks later, she sent me her draft interview in writing. And I was a bit horrified because the language was not quite there. She spoke well, but her writing is not quite there yet. Case number 1. But I still like her. She's very nice and good looking and everything. Case number 2. The guy is from Japan. He writes wonderfully. Good writer, excellent writer. From Japan. But in terms of his ability to present ideas orally, I don't think he's the best that I've seen. In fact, it's a bit weakish, if you ask me. So I was thinking, hey, perhaps the girl on the left did a lot of listening. In fact, she spent years in the US. So she was exposed to a lot of oral language, but probably she has not done sufficient amount of reading. The other guy, on the other hand, spent a lot of time reading. In fact, he would read and read on the bus, at home, everywhere. In fact, he speaks like a book, basically. His language is so bookish, perfect language, but it's not the kind of language that I would use in daily conversation. So because of this, I got interested. Hey, perhaps if we combine these 2 ideas together, we'll be able to produce, learners who are able to not only write very well, but also speak very well. This is still hypothetical. chances are very high that the students may do well on writing and on reading tests. And those students who do EL or EV only is likely to be able to speak well and also to be able to understand very well as well. The effect on ER, extensive reading, on listening and speaking is at best indirect, if you ask me. Again, this is hypothetical. We need some evidence here, and I'm glad Anna Chang is here, and she's very likely to pursue this idea very soon. She is a true blue researcher, if you ask me. The same thing, the effect of EL on reading and writing is at best indirect. We need to show that, if that is really the case. So to me, it makes a lot of sense to combine the two together in some way. In simple language, I like simple words. If you see and hear language often enough, see meaning reading and listening the language often enough, then chances are very well that you'll be able to say and to write and do things very well as well. Theoretical framework. I did read those theories many years ago. Back then it made a lot of sense, but now some of them did not make as much sense as they used to be. What I'm trying to say is some of them are still useful, many of them are still useful, but some are more applicable to different situations as others. I think you're familiar with these four guys, especially the first three. The last one probably is not as popular, but I like the fourth guy actually very much. That's Frederica, what's the name of that guy?
Oh,
the Kaiser.
I've never seen Dick.
The Kaiser.
I have no idea what he looked like.
Okay, the Kaiser. The first one is Stephen Krashen, comprehensible input. That's the basis for extensive reading and extensive listening. And then Mike Long, interaction hypothesis, is very interesting. It may be very useful for ESL situations. I think he's done a good job in explaining how interaction, negotiation of meaning, and things like that can contribute to language development. Although Krashen would say, no, it's not the talking, but it's the input that the students are receiving that contributes to language development. And then Swain from Canada introduced a comprehensible output hypothesis. Does it work? Yes, it does. But in ESL context, in immersion context, when you work with high-level students. Remember what I discussed yesterday? Was it yesterday or earlier today? Yesterday. That seems like a long time ago. Yesterday. With EFL students, think if we do a lot of output-based activities, I don't think we're doing a lot of justice to our students. Our students need a lot more input, especially in places where English is taught as a foreign language. They need a lot of input. But does it mean that we should not be asking them to produce output? We can. The key word is we allow them to say whatever they want, but that should not be the focus of our teaching. Our focus will be in providing students with a lot of input, either oral or written language input. And then the last one is skill-based theory, which is very interesting to me because according to this theory, language learning is very much like any other skills that people are learning. Swimming, driving, anything. And based on that theory, the most important thing is practice. So to me, these are the two most important theories that are the basis for extensive reading and also extensive listening. Here is additional information. This is taken from Wong and Van Patten 2003. After 30 years or even longer, 30 or more years of research, the conclusion is very clear. Our linguistic knowledge, our linguistic system develops because of input. That one is very clear, and I believe that 100%. It's input dependent. The system that we have developed as a result of receiving, being exposed to input is complex. In other words, we cannot break it down into small bits and pieces. Also, it's implicit in nature largely. And that gives rise to the question of whether explicit knowledge that we teach our students in the classroom can be turned into implicit knowledge eventually. That is a contentious issue. I don't think we have the answer yet. My take is that there's no harm teaching explicit knowledge in the classroom as long as we follow it up with a lot of comprehensible materials. Again, this applies to EFL situations. The skill-based learning theory basically is this, that practice makes perfect. However, I'd like to modify that a little bit, because in many of our EFL classes, we do a lot of practice as well. But that kind of practice doesn't really work very well. So I'm going to change this practice makes perfect into perfect practice that makes perfect. And that perfect practice is practice in extensive listening and extensive viewing. According to the skill learning theory, the most important thing in acquiring a skill is through developing what is known as procedural knowledge. And from procedural knowledge to automatic knowledge, we need hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours and hours of practice. So basically from attending to proceduralizing through to all the way to automatizing knowledge to become automatic. These are some of the benefits of extensive reading, as we all know. I would like to focus on a few things. The first one is very important, deeper level of comprehension. I think that is what is responsible for language acquisition. I'd like to quote, again, this is somebody that I know, Tomlinson. He's an expert on material development, and he says this, and I quote this a lot in my work. Materials should engage the emotions of the learner. Very often in our classroom, we engage the students' cognition. We use Bloom's taxonomy in our reading comprehension classes and in our listening comprehension classes. Is it good? Is it useful? The answer is probably yes. But if you are really concerned about helping students develop their proficiency eventually, then you will need to pay more attention to materials that engages them emotionally. So materials that make you feel sad, for example, materials that make you laugh, materials that make you angry, materials or reading stories that make you agitated, frustrated. After you read the story, I want to kill the person or something like that. That seems to be very useful for language learning. Faster processing. Okay, this is very simple to understand actually, but we need to really appreciate that for EFL learners, it's very important for us to realize that the relationship between form and meaning is not always straightforward like this. Yeah? You hear the language, sometimes there is a lag time. Thank you. Sometimes everyone knows this. Form and meaning. It's only lately that I began to understand the relationship between form and meaning. For EFL learners, for weaker students, the relationship is not always like this. You see a word, you read a word, and then the meaning immediately comes to you just like that. It doesn't always happen like that, especially with young developing learners of English. Let's look at this. The form is, I'm scared. All right? Very easy, I'm scared. For them, the meaning comes very slowly. Oh, I am scared. Something like that. Gradually, the relationship becomes much better, and the mapping of form and meaning is a little bit faster. And as they develop further, it's so fast like that, and the person will respond right away like that. Me too, that's right. Yeah? And that takes a while. That takes a while to develop. Better feel of the language. Again, The nature of linguistic knowledge that you develop after being exposed to a lot of language is that you have a feel of the language. You know that something is right or something is wrong, but you can't put your finger on it. I can tell you why, and that is probably what we refer to as implicit knowledge of the language. The first principle of developing materials for extensive reading and extensive listening is enjoyment. I saw Richard Day doing a presentation, and he said the same thing. I think he's been promoting the notion of enjoyment in learning English. Very often we are used to an old saying, no pain, no gain. That I don't think applies very well to English language learning. It should be no fun and no gain. So enjoyment is number one. Here is somebody who has developed a very high skill in playing ice hockey. And he says about the same thing. Look at this. The only way a kid is going to practice is if it's total fun. And it's fun for me. And it was for me. Yeah. So, two things. Number one, it has to be enjoyable, and the materials will have to be something that the students can relate to, something that is emotionally relevant to the students. I think we know about this as well. These are a few things that we need to be mindful about when we select materials for our students. Number one is comprehensibility. Number two is availability of the materials. And number three, different types of materials are very important for our students. And finally, the materials have to be not just interesting, but it has to be compelling. And that's a new word that Prussian actually came up with recently. Compelling. Compelling materials means materials that are so interesting. It's a book that is so interesting that you will not put it down until you get to the end of the story. Can you whisper to somebody sitting next to you, when was the last time you read a book that is so compelling that you don't want to put it down? Turn to your neighbor. I attended a session yesterday, and the presenters used the word home run. Home run books or home run stories. These are books that students enjoy reading the most. These are books that students want to finish reading the book as quickly as possible because the story plot, the plot is so exciting. Have you come across anything? Have you done any materials?
That my students really like? They like celebrities, celebrity bios, like biographies on celebrities.
Yes, books on celebrities. Thank you. When I was a student, I started really learning English in college. And I got interested. I was able to read well because I bumped into a home run book. It's a very compelling book. I don't know if you're about my age, and you should know this. It's a Perry Mason series. It's a very old detective story. If you're nodding your head, then that means you're about my age. Much younger than you're about my age. It was so exciting. The books were so exciting. And I would read until midnight, until 2 a.m. in the morning. I wanted to finish the books as quickly as possible. And I began to read and read and read, and before I knew it, I had read all the 50, episodes of series by the same author. And that was a very, very interesting experience to me. And that, to me, was the main source of my language development when I was a student back then. Let me just skip this. Sources. I mean, it's very important for us to, if we have money to buy books or to buy, CDs or talking books and things like that, then it should not be a problem. But if you come from places like Indonesia and Mexico, maybe, I don't know. If you're from Japan, it's very easy. You can ask the students to buy the books and everything. But if you come from other places, it may be a little bit challenging to find materials. However, nowadays there are there are online resources that are available, which I'm sure you have sort of been able to identify. I have some examples here. This is from the British Council. What I like about the source is that it's video, and you can turn on and off the subtitles, and more importantly, it's free. Number 2, Hello is another source. Hundreds and hundreds of listening materials for different groups of students. Elementary, intermediate, advanced groups of students. Again, hundreds, even thousands of dialogues and short, reading passage, short texts for listening materials, and they're all free. Commercial publishers, you have to pay, but sometimes they have materials available for free for people to download. So that is another source of materials. And this one is free also. ER Central and Rob Waring developed this. And they put together wonderful, wonderful materials for you to use. So big kudos for Rob Waring. Maybe turn to your neighbor and maybe share with your neighbor if you have identified sources from the internet that you have used with your students, especially the free ones. Can you just spend 1 minute with your neighbor? The rest of the audience, do you have anything to share?
Yeah. No, Spotlight Radio.
Okay.
And that's a
Everybody?
BBC 6 Minute English.
BBC 6 Minutes English. Excellent source, yes. Anything else? Anyone? Any other useful materials that you have been able to download?
ESL-lab.com.
ESL, yes. And yes.
There's a site called lyricstraining.com, one word. But what's great about it, very current songs. So you can get Bruno Mars, and you can get Frozen and all that kind of stuff. And it's not creative at all, it's just closes. But students can decide their own level. So if you choose beginner, you get like 10% of the words closed. And next level, 25%, etc., all the way up to 100%. So they can choose their own.
I think I've seen that, very useful, yes. I've seen that before. Beautiful songs, a wide collection of songs from old ones to the more recent ones. Wonderful resource, yes. Anyone else?
CNN Student News.
CNN Student News, yes. Voice of America as well. Voice of America, yes, the slow English version. Yes.
But the CNN Student News is not slow, but it's designed for junior high and high school students in the U.S., so it
Or
is
simplified language,
simplified
maybe slower
language.
speed as well. Slightly, yeah. Okay, good idea. So there's a lot of things out there that we can use. I think the key thing is for us to inform our students that, hey, there are sources out there that they can make use of. And make sure that you give time to your students to consult you so that they can make the best, and informed choices of the materials that they want to work on their own. Methodology. I will begin with the listening and viewing. I would call this under this one category called assisted listening, assisted viewing, or scaffolded viewing, if you like. Things that the students can do to make the listening more enjoyable because they can follow the materials well. Number 1 is narrow listening or reading. Number 2 is shadowing. Shadowing is like read along, if you like. It's just like karaoke, if you like. Yeah, shadowing. Number 3 is reading while listening. And the last one is readers' theater. Yesterday I attended a wonderful presentation about readers' theaters from our friends here from Mexico. And they will be sharing with you a bit later, yeah? Let's work together on this. Let's try to come up with a list of ideas about the potential language learning benefits of doing shadowing, of doing narrow reading, of doing reading while listening, and also doing readers' theater. Readers' theater is actually performing a short play, but the students are allowed to read instead of memorizing the lines from the play. Yeah? They can use a book, they can use a card or whatever. And I ask you to spend about 2 or 3 minutes looking at potential benefits of these ideas. Okay, let me begin with the first one, and then we will share the other 3, shadowing, reading while listening, and readers theater. Narrow reading or narrow listening is extremely useful for beginning students. They read not exactly the same book, but books of the same nature, usually written by the same author. In the US, I think many people are familiar with Sweet Valley High, and then Sweet Valley Teen, and Sweet Valley Kids. What I did when I was a student was an example of narrow reading as well. I read the same book by the same author, basically. It's a series of titles. And the benefits, number 1, familiarity. You get to see the same language recycle again and again and again. And familiarity is very important for supporting your comprehension. Yeah? Maybe we'll continue with reading while listening. Anna Chang has done a lot of research on reading while listening. 3 benefits. 1. Reading while
Just
listening.
like a quiz now.
Yes.
The benefit of reading while listening, you can improve both.
Yes.
Either reading or listening.
Okay. Your reading and listening improve because of what?
Because of you can match the spoken form and written form.
Yes. Okay. Fluency. Your fluency also improves. Yeah. Your fluency in listening also improves quite a bit. In fact, she has forgotten what she did in her own study. The study actually showed very clearly that if you do both, if students do both listening and reading at the same time, simultaneous reading and listening, actually they improve the most compared to students who are in the listening only or in the reading only conditions. Yeah?
Comprehension level is increasing.
Yes. In EFL situation, for example, comprehension is usually quite superficial. But if you are allowed to listen and read at the same time, I think your comprehension is likely to be a bit higher. Yeah.
You're doubling.
Exactly. You get the benefits of having 2 types of input at the same time, and that helps a lot. Yes, sir.
I think another is students are different, and so they're going to learn. Visual learners.
Yes, I like that. Yes, I like that idea. For some students, they prefer listening only. For some students, prefer reading only. But for some, they prefer both listening and reading at the same time. Readers' theater.
Pronunciation, spelling, grammar, vocabulary, listening, all the skills.
Yes.
And super skills.
Yes. Another thing is confidence in speaking. Confidence, which is very, very important. What I like about readers' theater is not so much about the performance. The performance is like what do you call that? The performance is like a bonus. Yeah, it's like an extra bonus. The most important part behind readers' theater is when the students actually spend time reading, rereading, preparing, rehearsing again and again before they perform. That is the main source of their language development. Yes, sir?
And they're also listening to each other, so it focuses listening.
Yes, excellent. Yes, ma'am. You're from the Philippines, are you?
Readers' theater learning is lasting. In the readers' theater, learning is lasting because the different senses is aroused, and there is automatic recognition, and that will enhance learning.
Yes, word recognition improves, and a lot of other things also improve at the same time. Yes, sir.
For example, reader theater.
In reader theater, we think that life is like a theater, it's not different. So in our life, we used to not only to think, but to feel. So learning is going to be together, as you say, thinking and feeling.
Life is like a stage. Yes, sir.
It increases engagement, commitment, and confidence.
Yes, all of the above. I agree fully with you. Let me give you an example. Let me see if you agree with me that this might be a very good exercise activity for your students. It's a little bit like reader's theater. But I have added some modern, technology built into this activity as well. So what you do is, you want the students to do a mock-up, news reading. Yeah. So the students first listen to some news. They can select nowadays from all sort of news. They can get a script. And then they can do some shadowing exercise as well. Plus, first they have to do some mock-up news reading before they eventually do the actual news reading, have it recorded, and put it on YouTube eventually. I think this is an example of how listening and also reading, extensive listening and extensive reading can be combined together nicely. The students might enjoy doing this, but I don't know about their teaching context. They might or might not enjoy doing this. Can I ask you to spend 1 minute? If this is something that is in line with the principles of extensive reading and listening, and if this is something that your students might enjoy doing. I think it's a form of assisted listening, assisted reading as well. Well, the topic is interesting too. It doesn't have to be politics. I mean, students hate politics anyway. So it can be anything that they have seen on TV. Yes, it can be sports, it can be about celebrities. They can look at TED series, for example, the exciting stuff. Yes?
I just want to ask a question.
Yes.
Do you think it's really good if I use this for my public speaking course?
Excellent.
Yeah, for public speakers, that's what sounds of idea because they try to say something.
I found that students, it's a good one to do in pairs, where where they're working on something together. They are less in the spotlight.
Excellent, excellent, yes. Group work is another form of supported learning, if you like. Working alone can be very lonely, can be very difficult at times, but working together is always a good idea. I'm a big fan of collaborative learning. This can be a stepping stone towards asking students to develop public speaking ability. Okay? But what often happens in our class is that we ask students to do public speaking right away. Here is a topic, prepare, do it. I think we should slowly ease students into developing public speaking abilities by doing assisted reading, assisted listening like this. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I have a question about how much scaffolding and assisted activity do we do before we actually engage in the EL and ER. When I work with teachers, the tendency is to go very quickly or to stay very long with these activities because they feel very normal classroom activity oriented.
Yes.
So, I mean, I agree that we sometimes have to help students to move into extensive listening and extensive reading. But how do we maintain this as simply a stepping stone? Because I want them to spend most of the class actually listening or reading.
Yes.
This is a very interesting question. Unfortunately, the answer is it depends. If you work with younger, less proficient, less experienced students, then you need to do a bit more time doing the scaffolding, listening and reading and so on. But if you work with higher level students, then maybe the duration can be much shorter. Anna, that's another suitable topic for you.
So we were wondering in this group if this would be considered extensive or intensive listening.
Yeah.
Okay. If the language is comprehensible, if the task is right there, about right for the students, I think it's more extensive rather than intensive. And if the students engage in a lot of language-related practice, like, reading for specific purposes, because in this exercise, for example, the students have a very clear purpose in mind. You have to produce a YouTube audio, and you can also add an additional task. Make sure that you get at least 50 likes from your friends, for example, and then they'll work very hard on this. Intensive reading to me, or intensive listening, is when students deal with difficult materials, when they have to spend a lot of time reading a very short text, and then, even then, they're not able to answer all of the questions. We're not doing, comprehension questions here, but we are giving students practice in developing deeper comprehension of what they have listened to or what they have read. Let me just continue a little bit more. Let's look at some post-reading activities. I'm going to make this available. All my slides are available on my academia.edu page. You just go there and then you can download almost all of my papers there. I know sometimes I am violating the copyright thing, but nowadays it's becoming so expensive for people to buy journal articles and book chapters and all that.
Sorry, what was that reference again?
Academia.edu. It's like an online repository for people to put their work there. Yes? No, you can download it. Yes, you can download. Another place you can get in touch with me is through a Facebook group called Teachers' Voices. Teachers' Voices. It's one of the best out there. It's strictly professional, because I make sure that only professional things are discussed in the forum. And this lady from Mexico actually is a member of Teacher Voices as well, so I'm very pleased to meet her eventually in person from Mexico. Post-reading. Some people have argued that, well, reading should be its own reward. Tom Robb actually is doing a presentation after this. I think he's arguing that the post-reading activities is okay, as long as they're interesting, number one. Number two, not difficult to do. And number three, it doesn't take up a lot of your time, a lot of your students' time. I think these are the three things that are most important to remember. And because of that, number one, doing book report is, you should scratch that completely. Book report is really, very, very bad for your students. Because the time spent that your students spend writing book report should be better spent reading or listening to materials. 3-2-1 is a very interesting activity. This can be done in a classroom. 3-2-1 is very easy to use. 3 minutes. First, retell the story or whatever you have read in 3 minutes to one person. Do it again with another person, but this time do it in 2 minutes. And the last one, do it again in 1 minute. I like the do it again method in language teaching, but it has to be done in a way that is interesting to your students. And 3-2-1 is interesting because they're doing it to 3 different people. And each time, the time is varied. First is longer, second time is shorter, and the third time is shorter. You are teaching student summarization skill as well, rather implicitly here. Next, very simple things that you can ask your students to do. Describe a scene that make you laugh. Laughing is good in language learning. Another one is list 3 reasons why your friends should read the book or the video that they have just watched. I think that can be very interesting. It requires a bit of thinking skill, but it doesn't require the students to really remember all the details of what they have read or what they have watched. Next one, using technology. Again, this should be seen as a bonus. This is fun to do. The students have read something, and then they share what they have read in using modern media, like Cartoons Maker. It's free. And there are many similar programs on the internet that is free for students to use. It's very easy to use. They just drag and paste, and then they can also write a few dialogues in there. Cartoon Maker like this. It will take you only 1 minute to produce, or sometimes if you want to have a more interesting dialogue or discussion, probably 5 minutes. Yeah, but the key thing is not the Cartoon Maker, but it's the reading, or the listening, or the video viewing that we do. How about post-reading activity that you have done? Post-reading, post-viewing things that you think might be of interest to your students. 3 things to remember. Number 1, it has to be easy to do. Number 2, it has to be exciting, interesting, purposeful, audience-oriented as well if possible. And number 3, it should not take a lot of their time. Extensive reading and listening should be done outside the classroom, but ideally we should allocate curriculum time. Otherwise, students will not be doing what they're supposed to be doing outside the classroom. Especially in the beginning, you should allocate curriculum time so that you can do all these post-reading or post-viewing activities with your students in the classroom. Any bright ideas? Yes, sir.
I use quite a lot, I think because I come from a drama background, I use quite a lot of still images. Still think they create a moment from the book, and you can either then add, they can either create a subtitle, or they can have a narrator. They can have somebody who actually explains, or the audience guess what is happening, ask questions.
Excellent, yes. Something that is fun to do, something creative like that will be exciting for the students to do. Yeah? Remember, post-reading activity is not supposed to be a punishment for your students. Do not punish your students for what they have just done enjoyably. I think we are killing their interest, we are killing their motivation. Yes, ma'am.
My students had iPads last year. They were very excited to use them, and they all had iMovie, so they did book trailers, which they really enjoyed.
Excellent. That's another excellent idea. Technology. Yes, use of technology can be very exciting. Anything else? Yes? Anything else?
A line.
Yes.
It was 4 years ago, some teachers based in Japan, their names are Sophie and Matthew, came to my university and they told us a strategy, and it was to describe a story using only 7 words.
How many words?
7, no more than 7 words.
Yes, I like that. Yes. Yes. Describe the story in not more than 7 words. I like that. Or reduce it further to 5 words. Or just 1 word.
Last year we had a contest at ILC that students had to design a new book.
Yes, I like that. Yes. Yes. And that is a kind of monitoring for us. This is one thing that people are often very concerned about, extensive reading and listening. How do we monitor? How do we know that they've done something? Traditionally, we ask them, questions, multiple choice questions, but that should be considered as just one of the many, many possible ways. There are many, many other creative ways that we can come up with in order to find out, to check if the students have actually read it. And that is an excellent idea. Yes. Drama thing is an excellent idea too. Yes, ma'am.
In the story, as a student, you are the writer. How would you end the story?
I like that too. Yes, yes. How would you end the story? Yes.
Author,
Yes.
the main character. So
Yes,
the
yes.
story will be more
Yes, yes,
interesting and
yes.
fun.
Excellent, excellent. The word is switch. Switch. That switch can help you a lot in thinking about ideas that you can use with your students. Gender switch, number 1. If the main character is a man, switch it to a woman. Context switch. If a thing happens in the US, change that to the Philippines or Mexico. What else?
I got my students that I start the story and then everybody's in circle and they continue the story and they create the story.
That's good. If they have if they read, assuming that they read the same story together. Yeah? But like, I think I've now come to the end. So basically what I'm trying to say is, if we do both, then chances are very high that our students' 4 skills might improve together. Yeah? Rather than if we do extensive reading only or extensive listening and viewing only. Both will have to be available for your students. Thank you.